What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and I'm joined by Nick, and we are here today to talk about our Total War Warhammer 2 Beginner's Guide. Now, this is a game that, it's a sequel to the first Warhammer game, but, if this is the first game that you've jumped in of this kind, there's quite a few things that you should probably know when you're jumping in. So Nick and I are going to go through the things that we feel are the most important. This is more of a summary. We're not going to really get into the nitty-gritty of it. This is really, if you're just getting into it, this is what you should know. We're also going to have a tips and tricks later on next week.
And
so
that's
that
what you'll
will be
go
when we
into
really, that's when we'll really go into the stuff.
So if you've either never played a Total War game before, or you just haven't played Total War Warhammer, or haven't played Total War in a while and you don't know what the changes are, we're basically going to cover things that new players would need to know.
So Nick, you start the game out by choosing your race. So what do people need to know just when you first start?
There's going to be 2 leaders per race, 4 races to choose from. Really, it doesn't matter what you pick, because you're not going to know what kind of playstyle you like at first. You can just pick like I did. I picked which one I thought looked coolest. Just be aware that each race in Total War Warhammer has very unique abilities. They all play very different. They all have strengths and weaknesses, and the way you play them will be fundamentally different from one another. But without having played the game, you're not going to be able to understand that, so just pick one, dive right in. The next thing that's going to be a big help seems obvious, just pay attention to tutorials. It sounds obvious, but they do them kind of like, in with the game's lore, so that the guy doesn't just tell you, press this button to do this. He says it in really long, drawn-out sentences, so try to avoid just hitting all the check marks, because they gloss over some pretty important stuff in the first few tutorials when you start the game.
Okay, so then when you get into the actual game, they do, like Nick said, after the tutorial, they do throw quite a few things at you, and one of the
very fast.
most prevalent, very fast, and one of the most prevalent things in this game it's kind of a new addition, is all of these objectives. You're constantly going to get hit with these objectives that are going to be in the top right hand of your screen that are all really kind of different things. They could be, destroy this settlement, destroy this race, destroy this random thing, loot this random temple. Some of them are time-based. Some of them have, like, say, you have 3 turns to complete them. Some of them don't run out. And they all have their own special, like, perks they're going to give you. They'll give you money. They'll give you just different things that will help your group in all. So you're going to want to be, you don't really want to go out of your way. I find that early on in the game, sometimes the objectives they give you are for very far away things. You don't have to worry about it right away, but just keep in mind, this game is very objective-based, whereas maybe the past ones have been, just crush your enemies.
Yeah, it hasn't been like, you haven't had the same kind of like a bunch of things to do like that. So, and the next thing new players are going to want to know is that it can be really intimidating at first, because you have all these different currencies and percentages and stuff in the game, like happiness or public order, and then you have corruption, which is a whole other thing. You have the treasury, which is your gold, and then depending on what race you pick, you also might have food or other race-specific variables. These can all be like kind of intimidating at first, but within the first like 20 or 30 turns, you'll figure out what they have to do with what, like how much food it might take per how big your army is, or you run out of gold because you recruited a ton of units, and then now your army's so big that its upkeep size is more than you're making. Don't worry about all that. That's just part of playing a Total War game for the first time. Just power through it, and if you have to, start over. But it's something you'll definitely learn within the first 30 turns, so don't be too intimidated.
So when it comes to the getting into more of the fighting portion of this game, obviously in order to fight, you're going to need to move your massive amounts of soldiers, and there's a couple things that goes into that. Obviously, you're going to want to recruit them, and you do that by clicking on their flag, and you just keep adding them. It's best to kind of have a variety of the different variations of your soldiers in that group. But what's important to note, if you're just brand new coming into this, is when you're moving the person who carries all of your soldiers, they can only move a certain length per turn. So you're going to want to be careful with how long you're moving them, and you're going to want to be aware of what's your territory and what's not your territory. Yeah, if you go in their territory, and another thing too is you only replenish troops if you're inside one of your bases. So if you just fought a big war and you want to keep moving your men, well, you're not going to be able to regain any of those soldiers that you lost until you...
Make sure you pay attention to that, because some factions too have the ability to take the different stances, and then sometimes some of the stances will let you replenish an enemy territory and stuff.
Yeah, and so that goes into, you know, a more strategic way of saying, you know what you've got and what you want to have before moving out. If you want to take a settlement, make sure when you're moving out with your big group of guys that you have who you want. Because if you move out without who you want, then that makes it way more difficult. It's also easier to recruit soldiers when you're in your bases. It costs less money and sometimes takes less time than if you're just out in the wild. Okay, so then when you want to obviously fight the person, you are going to have either a person or a settlement. You're going to have a couple choices. You can encircle them, you can straight out fight them, you can auto-resolve. It's important to know when to do these things. So if you can see the bar that will have your kind of victory success versus theirs in green and red. If it's a massive win for your side, you probably just want to auto-resolve. You don't always want to auto-resolve, but you do for the most part. It's not even worth wasting your time going into the battle. However, if it's more even, or if you're actually in the negative where you could lose, it's best to actually get into battles. So now we're going to go into battles. So Nick, what are some things that people should know when they go into the actual fighting?
So the actual fighting is like a totally separate part from the main campaign map. Obviously, you'll be given, depending on where you are in the campaign map, like a specific type of terrain. You know, I'm sure there's more than just forests and stuff, but it's not just there to look pretty. Like all the hills, all the foliage, the trees and stuff, that all actually affects, you know, how your units are being seen or what your units can see. So, you know, if you have ranged units or something, they're going to obviously do better on a hill than they would at the bottom of the hill. You know, if you have units that do a lot of damage, but they get taken down, you know, they don't have a lot of health, you're going to want to hide them in the trees or something. So, you know, you can experiment with that yourself, but just make sure you know that it's not just there for looks. Like the battlefield itself is very important. Another important thing that's unique to Warhammer, the Total War game, that's not in the previous Total War titles, is your units, specifically your leader, will have a lot of abilities. They're very important. You want to make sure, like, you should always be using them. You should never go like a full battle without using them. You should constantly be clicking on your hero, waiting for them to cool down. They like drastically help your units. A lot of times they're like heals, or they give them bonuses for defense or attack. So, you know, don't leave that on the table. Make sure you use that to your advantage.
So like we said, there's a lot to this game, especially if you're coming in new. There's a lot to kind of process as you get in. These have been our kind of beginner's guide ideas of what you should know going into it. Again, Nick and I are going to have our tips and tricks video of Total War Warhammer 2 on Wednesday. So if you're looking for, you know, a more specific, okay, now I've gotten into the game, I'm getting used to it, what do I do now? How do I really, you know, exploit the game? We're going to talk about those things for Wednesday's video. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any suggestions for other beginner's guide things that you think people should know, leave it in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Podcast Now, like and share. We will see you guys on the next Total War Warhammer 2 video.